So here we're going to be talking about rectangles, which are parallelograms with four right angles. And I kind of think of that as kind of the cousin of the rhombus, where that's a parallelogram with four congruent sides. This is a parallelogram with four congruent angles. They have to be right angles. If they're going to add up to 360, the four congruent angles have to be four right angles. So here we're making the angles congruent, whereas in the rhombus, you make these sides congruent, but they carry all the properties of a parallelogram down. So really, what came with a parallelogram was that these diagonals were bisected. Now we're going to show that actually they become congruent in a rectangle. We could probably do this more formally with angles and showing that these are congruent triangles, but I also just see Pythagorean theorem there. So I'm thinking about this triangle, which has, let's just call this W for width and L for length. And then there's a second triangle here, overlapping a little bit, but it uses that same set of dimensions, the W. We know that opposite sides are congruent in parallelograms, so we don't really even need anything from a rectangle for that. But we do need these right angles so that we can show that these two sides would really just be the same, because they are both just using Pythagorean theorem with the same width and length. So those diagonals have to be congruent, and since they're bisected already, each part has to be congruent. So once we have these congruent diagonals, and we already know that they're bisected, we have all these congruent parts here, which really is going to form four isosceles triangles. This triangle and this triangle are congruent. They have the same base here and the same two equal sides. So their base angles are going to be congruent. These four angles are all congruent in a rectangle. And then the same thing applies for these two. They have those same sides, but their base is different from this base. So they're going to have different base angles here. Those are different triangles completely. These two are congruent to each other. These two are congruent, but not all four are congruent. They have different base sides and base angles there.